Orator reflective, with a slight smile. You know, people always ask me how I knew. How I knew he was the one. And honestly, I never expected to find my answer in a broken-down Dodge Charger and a boy well, a man who I'd watched grow up from afar. Sound of coffee being poured, settling into a comfortable chair. Narrator, amused. It all started on a Tuesday. I remember because I was supposed to be at yoga, but Dana texted me instead. Ellie, Jake's car broke down near your place. Can you help? Simple enough, right? I'd known Jake since he was Dana's baby cousin, all scraped knees, gap-toothed grins, and that wild laughter that could fill a room. But the person who showed up at my door that golden afternoon? Sound of an engine sputtering, footsteps on gravel. Narrator, slow, intrigued, wasn't a boy anymore. 6 feet tall, shoulders that had filled out somewhere between high school graduation and whatever he'd been doing since. Dark hair tousled like he'd been running his hands through it, and grease smeared on his forearms from trying to fix that stubborn Charger. When he smiled at me, God, that smile, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Music swells low, teasing. Narrator, soft laugh. Miss Ellie, he said, and that voice, when did it get so deep? So warm, you're a lifesaver? He said it like he knew exactly what that tone did to me. Like he was testing something. Pause. A shaky breath. Narrator, guilty, but intrigued. I handed him a wrench from my dad's old toolbox. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, and I felt this jolt of electricity. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd buried after my divorce. Heat. Real, undeniable heat. Sound of tools clinking, hood popping open. Narrator, warming to the memory. We spent hours under that car. Him explaining the engine like I was actually listening to the words instead of watching the way his muscles flexed every time he tightened a bolt. The way he'd pause, thinking, then explain something with such patience. See this here, Miss Ellie? This is why. She's not starting. His hands were confident, skilled. I found myself wondering what else those hands could do. Sound of rain beginning to patter. Narrator, smirking. And then rain. A sudden downpour that came out of nowhere, trapping us in my garage. He was soaked within seconds. White t-shirt clinging to his chest, water dripping from his hair onto his shoulders. When he caught me looking, he didn't look away. Just up closer, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. You're staring, Miss Ellie. Music swells electric, charged. Narrator, breathless. I should have laughed it off. Made some joke about old women and their failing eyesight. But the way he said it like a challenge, like he wanted me to be staring, I couldn't help myself. Maybe I like what I see, I said, and I swear the temperature in that garage went up 10 degrees. Heavy silence. The sound of rain on metal roof. Narrator, whispering. That's when he kissed me. Hard, desperate, like he'd been waiting years to do it. His hands tangled in my hair, and I could taste rain and something uniquely him. And God, help me, I kissed him back. Pulled him closer, let myself get lost in the moment I'd been fighting since he walked up my driveway. Fade. A soft moan lingers. Narrator, more urgent now. After that, we couldn't stop. It became our secret. Stolen. Moments in my garage when he'd come by to check on the car. Late night texts that started innocent and became anything but. Him showing up at my door after midnight, his hands rough from work, his mouth hungry for mine. Sound of a couch creaking, whispered laughter, narrator, husky. I knew it was wrong. He was 18, Dana's family. But when he looked at me like I was the only woman in the world, like I was beautiful and desirable, and not just his cousin's divorced friend pushing 40, I forgot how to care about right and wrong. Music shifts darker, more urgent narrator, building tension. For 3 months, we lived in this bubble. He'd text me during his lunch breaks. I'd find excuses to drive past the auto shop where he worked. We'd meet at the lake outside town, park under the old oak tree, and just talk about everything. His dreams of opening his own shop someday, my fear of getting older alone. The way we both felt like we were pretending to be people we weren't. For everyone else a martyr or vulnerable, he made me feel young again. Not in some desperate clinging to youth way, but genuinely alive, like I had something to offer. Like my experience, my body, my heart, they were all worth something. Worth everything. Music becomes more complex, layered, narrator, darkening, but secrets have a way of eating you alive. The guilt started small a twinge when Dana would mention Jake at lunch, wondering why he seemed so happy lately. It grew into this constant ache. I'd catch myself in the mirror, wondering what I was doing, what people would think, what Jake was sacrificing by being with me. Sound of a key turning in a lock, narrator, terrified, until the night Dana came over unannounced. I was on the couch with Jake, his lips trailing down my neck, his hands, well, his hands were where they shouldn't have been. We were so lost in each other that we didn't hear her car, didn't hear her key in the lock. A sharp gasp, narrator, broken. Ellie? What the hell? The look on Dana's face, betrayal, disgust, confusion, it shattered me. Jake jumped up, tried to straighten his shirt, but it was too late. The damage was done. Music cuts. Dead silence. Narrator, voice cracking. Dana didn't yell. She just looked at me like I was a stranger. He's a kid, Ellie, she whispered. My kid cousin. What are you doing? And then she left. Just walked. Out of my house, out of my life, without another word. Sound of a front door slamming. Narrator, tearful. Jake tried to stay. Tried to tell me it didn't matter what she thought, what anyone thought. But it did matter. The guilt was crushing. I could see Dana's face every time I closed my eyes. I could hear her voice. He's a kid. Music swells, emotional, conflicted, narrator, resolute but pained. So I ended it that night. Told Jake it was a mistake, that I was sorry, but we couldn't do this anymore. The way he looked at me, like I'd broken something fundamental in him, I'll never forget it. Don't do this, Ellie, he said. Don't throw us away because of what other people think. Sound of footsteps walking away. Narrator, regretful, but I did. I threw us away. Convinced myself it was the right thing to do. The mature thing to do. Music shifts to melancholy. Narrator, distant. Months passed. Dana didn't speak to me. Our friend group fractured. Jake left for college and the fall engineering program 2 states away. I told myself it was for the best, that he'd find someone. his own age, someone who made sense. I threw myself into work, dated a few men closer to my age, and pretended I didn't check his social media every night before bed. Sound of rain again, softer this time, narrator building to climax, until one rainy afternoon in March, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Thought it might be a delivery, or maybe Dana, finally ready to talk. I opened the door and, sound of a doorbell, a deep, familiar voice. "Miss Ellie?" Narrator, soft, shocked, Jake, standing there, older now, his eyes steady and sure. He wasn't the 18-year-old who'd left. This was a man who knew what he wanted. "I'm not a kid anymore," he said simply, "and I don't care who knows it." Music swells triumphant, warm, narrator, voice breaking with emotion. He'd driven 8 hours in the rain. Skipped his spring break plans. "I've tried to move on," he said. "Dated other girls, told myself you were right. But I can't stop thinking about you. About us. About the way you made me feel like I could be myself." Sound of footsteps, a door closing. Narrator whispered, "We talked for hours. About the hurt, the guilt, the way we'd both been pretending to be okay. About how love doesn't follow rules or timelines or other people's expectations. About how some connections are worth fighting for, even when the world tells you they're wrong." Music becomes hopeful, narrator, smiling through tears. "It took time. Dana forgave us eventually, not quickly, but eventually. She saw how Jake looked at me, how I looked at him, how we brought out the best in each other. You make him better," she finally admitted. "And he makes you happy in a way I haven't seen in years." Sound of ocean waves, narrator, radiant. 3 years later, Jake took me to the beach where we'd had our first real conversation about the future, where he'd told me he wanted to build something with me, not just steal moments. He got down on one knee right there in the sand and slipped a ring on my finger. "Took me long enough," he teased. Music fades to gentle close. Narrator, quiet, resolved. "So yeah, my friend's 18-year-old cousin needed a favor with his car, and I never expected how it would end. With a wedding last summer that Dana helped plan. With Jake's auto shop that's thriving downtown. With me learning that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places." Long pause. Narrator, final wise. "People still whisper sometimes. About the age difference, about how we met, about whether it's appropriate. But when I wake up next to the man who loves me completely, who chose me not despite my age but because of who I am, their whispers don't matter anymore." Sound of a car pulling up, familiar footsteps, narrator, laughing softly. "And that's him now, coming home from the shop, still calling me Miss Ellie when he wants to make me smile. Still looking at me like I'm the only woman in the world." Music swells one final time. Narrator, content. Some stories don't follow the script we expect. Some love doesn't fit in neat little boxes. But the best stories, the ones worth telling, they're the ones that surprise us. The ones that teach us that connection doesn't have an expiration date, and that sometimes the most beautiful thing you can say to someone is simply, "I choose you." Final fade to black.